The first time I saw my own blood on the marble floor, I realized I had already waited too long to leave. It spread in small, glossy streams, catching the light from the chandelier, the way wine does when it spills during a dinner you're pretending to enjoy. I remember the cold sting of air against my cheek, the broken sound of his voice somewhere behind me. Angry, disbelieving, calling my name as if he had every right to own it. That was the night I ran. The world outside our penthouse felt nothing like the one I had lived in for 3 years. It was wet, loud, alive. Rain slicked the pavement into mirrors, and my reflection was a ghost in every puddle I passed. Bare feet, torn dress, mascara melting down my face like black rain. I didn't have a plan. All I had was the desperate instinct to keep moving, because stopping meant going back, and going back meant dying slowly in a cage made of apologies. Cars hissed by, throwing water over my legs. I could taste metal in my mouth, fear's flavor, sharp and electric. Somewhere behind me I thought I heard tires screech. I ducked into an alley without thinking, pressing myself into the shadows, my heart thrumming so fast it made my vision blur. I waited for him to appear, the man who once told me love was devotion, but taught me it was ownership instead. But only the rain came, steady and relentless, washing the city clean while I stayed dirty with guilt. For hours I walked. My feet went numb. The sky lightened to gray. People began to appear. Early commuters, coffee cups steaming in their hands, eyes sliding past me like I was invisible. Maybe I was. It's strange how the world doesn't pause for your heartbreak. It just keeps breathing while you learn how to again. By dawn I found myself near the docks, where the air smelled of salt and diesel. I collapsed on a bench outside a shuttered cafe, wrapping my arms around myself. My fingers were swollen where he had gripped them too hard the night before. I stared at the bruises blooming like violets and told myself they were flowers, not warnings, because the truth was still too heavy to carry. That was when the car stopped. It was black, sleek, silent, wrong for this part of town. The window rolled down slowly, and a man's voice, low and even, cut through the morning fog. "Are you lost?" I turned my face away, instinct tightening every muscle. "No." "Looks like you are." His accent wasn't local. Italian maybe, soft but edged with command. I looked up then, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. The man inside wasn't the kind you ask for help from. He was too composed, too dangerous, the kind of beauty that belonged to predators and saints alike. His eyes were dark, not black but something close, and when they met mine, the world went strangely quiet. "I'm fine," I said again, though my voice trembled. He tilted his head slightly. "You're bleeding." I glanced at my arm and saw the thin line where the glass had cut me earlier, blood mingling with rain. "It's nothing." He opened the passenger door. "Get in, before whoever did that finds you again." Every rational part of me screamed no, but the part that had been running all night, the part that was tired of fear, heard something else in his voice. Certainty. Not kindness, not pity, just the unshakable promise that whatever hunted me wouldn't dare follow if I sat beside him. So I did. The leather was cold against my skin. He handed me a handkerchief, white, impossibly clean, and I pressed it against my arm. The city blurred outside as he drove, fast but smooth like he owned the road. "Name?" he asked. "Amara," I whispered. "Pretty. Doesn't suit the way you look right now." I stared at the rain racing across the window. "You don't know how I look. I know fear," he said quietly. "I see it every day." I wanted to ask what that meant, but I didn't. Silence filled the car, thick and humming. After a while, he turned down a narrow street lined with old stone buildings and parked beside a gate I hadn't noticed until it opened on its own. "Where are we?" "Safe," he said simply. "For now." The gate closed behind us with a sound like finality. Inside was a courtyard filled with lanterns still burning from the night before, their light soft and golden against the rain. He led me through an archway into a room that smelled of coffee and cedar. Someone brought towels, clothes, a first aid kit. I wanted to ask who they were, but the man's presence made questions feel unnecessary, even impossible. "You can rest," he said. "No one will touch you here." I sat on the edge of the bed they gave me. My hands shook. "Why are you helping me?" He studied me for a long time, then said, "Because sometimes the only way to destroy a monster is to shelter his prey." I didn't know what that meant then. I would later. He left, and exhaustion dragged me under. I dreamed of thunder and glass and a voice calling my name from far away. When I woke, sunlight poured through the curtains. My head throbbed. The clothes I'd been given were soft, oversized. On the nightstand lay a silver ring, delicate, unfamiliar. And beside it, a folded piece of paper with handwriting that made my stomach twist. Marriage certificate. 2 names signed at the bottom. Lucian Moretti. Amara Valen. For a long time I could only stare, the edges of the world blurring as the meaning sank in. The man from the car. The stranger with the quiet voice. The one whose presence filled the room even after he'd gone. I was married. To him. The door opened, and there he was, framed in morning light, sleeves rolled up, eyes unreadable. "Good," he said, his tone calm, almost casual. "You're awake, Mrs. Moretti." My mouth went dry. "What did you do?" His smile was slow, dangerous, the kind that made your pulse trip over itself. "What I had to. To keep you alive." I wanted to shout, to tear the paper apart, to tell him he had no right. But something in the way he looked at me, steady, unflinching, as if he already knew the war inside my chest, stole the words from my throat. Outside, the rain had stopped. The courtyard was quiet again, deceptively peaceful. "You'll stay here," he said, "until it's safe." "And if I don't want to?" He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, smell the faint trace of smoke and sandalwood on his skin. "Then you can leave," he murmured, "but the man you ran from will find you before nightfall, and I don't intend to bury you the same day I married you." I flinched, not at the threat, but at the certainty. He turned and walked away before I could answer, his shadow long and sharp across the floor. When the door closed, I sank back onto the bed, staring at the papers that had rewritten my life overnight. Somewhere beyond the walls, I could hear men talking in low voices, the clink of glass, the hum of engines. The air smelled faintly of gun oil and rain. I didn't know who Lucian Moretti really was, but as I traced my finger over the ink of my new name, I felt the first stirrings of a realization that chilled me to the bone. I had escaped one cage only to step into another, and this one, I suspected, had no door at all. When I was a child, my mother once told me that the things which save you in the night often come to claim you in the morning. And as I stared at the ring glittering faintly on my hand, I realized she had been right all along. The sunlight slanted through the tall windows, gilding the room in deceptive warmth. But the cold in my chest hadn't thawed since the moment I woke to find myself married to a stranger. I hadn't even known his name until last night. Now it was carved beside mine on a piece of paper that felt heavier than iron. Lucian Moretti. The name tasted dangerous even in thought, a melody of threat and elegance. I sat there for a long time, the ring catching the light like a quiet accusation, until a knock sounded at the door. Firm, deliberate, the kind of knock that didn't ask permission so much as announce presence. Before I could answer, the door opened. Lucian filled the doorway the way storms fill skies. Completely, unavoidably. He was dressed in black again, sleeves rolled up, a faint scar visible on his forearm, a watch glinting at his wrist. His dark hair was still damp from the shower, his expression unreadable. "You didn't eat," he said, his voice low and even. "I told them to bring breakfast an hour ago." "I didn't ask for it," I replied, my throat dry. His eyes flicked to the untouched tray on the table. Fruit, coffee, something that looked too rich to touch. "You'll need your strength." "For what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward the table, unhurried, and poured a cup of coffee for me, as if we were merely two ordinary people starting an ordinary morning. The scent of roasted beans filled the room, grounding me for half a heartbeat before he turned, cup in hand, and said, "Because the man you ran from has already started looking." The air left my lungs. You know who he is?" Lucian nodded. "Of course. I make it my business to know everything about the devils that touch what's mine." "I'm not yours." His gaze sharpened, and for an instant something almost like amusement flashed in his eyes. "Legally, you are." I rose to my feet, every nerve in my body screaming with panic and disbelief. "You tricked me." "No." He set the cup down gently, his movements precise, measured. "You signed the papers yourself. I didn't force your hand." "I didn't even know what I was signing." "You didn't ask." The calmness in his voice infuriated me, the control that wrapped around every syllable like a chain. "You can't just marry someone to protect them." He tilted his head slightly, studying me. "Would you rather I had let you die?" The words hit harder than I wanted them to. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Because the truth was, if he hadn't stopped that night, I might have been another nameless tragedy in the morning news. A woman who disappeared after leaving her fiancé's apartment. One more unsolved case filed away in silence. Lucian stepped closer, his presence magnetic, suffocating in its intensity. "You were being hunted," he said quietly, "and I don't protect anyone unless I make them untouchable." "Untouchable," I repeated bitterly. "You mean owned." His jaw tightened. "I don't own people, Amara. I keep them alive." "And what happens when I don't want your protection anymore?" He gave a small, humorless smile. "Then you'll walk out of that gate. But if you do, he'll find you, and I'll have to kill him. Either way, you'll come back to me, just like the tide returns to the sea." I hated how his words sank into me, how part of me believed them. Lucian turned toward the window, the morning light tracing the edge of his profile. "You'll stay in this wing of the house for now. My men know not to bother you. Eat. Rest. Heal. And you?" He looked over his shoulder, a faint smirk curving his lips. "I have business to handle. You'll be safe here until I return." He left before I could reply, the door clicking shut behind him with soft finality. Hours passed. I tried to eat, but the food tasted like ash. The silence of the villa pressed in from all sides, vast and heavy, broken only by the distant murmur of voices below. Men speaking in low tones, boots on marble, the muted echo of power being exercised without restraint. By afternoon, I couldn't stand it anymore. I wandered out of the room and down the corridor. The house was beautiful. Too beautiful in the way prisons often are. High ceilings, old, paintings, the faint scent of citrus and gunpowder lingering in the air. Everything looked curated, but nothing felt alive. At the end of the hallway, a large wooden door stood ajar. Inside was an office lined with shelves and a wide desk littered with papers. Maps, photographs, names scrawled in neat handwriting. I shouldn't have looked. But I did. And there, among the photographs, was a face I knew. My ex, Julian. His smile, that carefully constructed charm that had fooled everyone, stared back at me from the corner of a surveillance photo. But this time, he wasn't standing on a stage at one of his charity galas. He was shaking hands with men I didn't recognize, men whose eyes were harder, colder, Lucian's voice came from behind me. Now you see why I couldn't let you go? I froze. He was leaning in the doorway, watching me with the calm patience of a predator who has already closed the distance. You were investigating him, I whispered. I was preparing for him, he corrected. Julian Moreau has been buying his way into circles that belong to me. He's been selling information, weapons, names. When I saw you running from him that night, I knew exactly who you were running from. I turned to face him fully. So this was never about me, it was about him. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. At first, his gaze softened just slightly. But now it's about you. Why? Because he's not the only one who leaves scars. I didn't understand what he meant, but something in his tone made my pulse quicken. He moved closer, slow and deliberate, until there was barely a breath between us. You think I saved you, he said quietly. But you don't know what you've walked into, Amara. My world doesn't offer freedom, only choices that feel like it. I looked up at him, and the air between us tightened, heavy with something I couldn't name. Fear, curiosity, maybe both. Then what choice do I have? I asked. Lucian's eyes darkened, and his voice dropped to a whisper that slid under my skin. The same one I have, to survive. He reached out, brushed his thumb along my jaw, and for a moment I forgot how to move. His touch wasn't gentle, but it wasn't cruel either. It was a promise wrapped in warning. Then he pulled away as quickly as he'd come, the space between us flooding with cold air. Dinner is at 8, he said. Don't make me send someone to get you. And then he was gone again, leaving me surrounded by silence and shadows. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at Julian's face on the desk and Lucian's shadow fading through the doorway, realizing with a slow, dawning chill that the man I had married to escape one monster might be even more dangerous. Not because he wanted to hurt me, but because he could destroy me without ever raising his hand. And somehow, part of me already knew I wouldn't want to stop him. There is a difference between being safe and being free, and it took me less than a week in Lucian Moretti's house to understand that one could live behind walls of marble and still feel the bars pressing against their skin. The villa was beautiful. Immaculate floors, golden light spilling through tall windows, a constant hush that made even breathing feel like an intrusion. But beauty can be its own kind of captivity. Every morning began the same way. Breakfast left outside my door by someone I never saw. Footsteps fading before I could say thank you. Silence stretching like a noose. I started counting them, the rituals, the rules, the way his men lingered in the hallways, polite but watchful, as if the walls themselves had eyes. Lucian was rarely home during the day. When he was, the air shifted. Conversations fell quiet. The servants moved faster. Even the clocks seemed to tick more cautiously, as if time itself bowed to him. I tried to ignore the pull I felt when he entered a room, the way his presence swallowed space. Calm, deliberate. A gravity that made it impossible to look anywhere else. He spoke to me only when necessary. His words measured, and his silences heavier than iron. But at night, when the house slept, I wandered. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't a prisoner, even if that meant walking the same hallways over and over, my reflection flickering in the glass, like a ghost testing its boundaries. The air smelled faintly of cedar and gunpowder. Lamps burned low, painting the walls in honeyed light. Somewhere below, I could hear voices. Men talking in hushed Italian, the occasional metallic sound of a gun being cleaned, the quiet rhythm of a life lived in shadows. Once, I followed the sound. It led me to the balcony overlooking the courtyard, where the rain had started again, soft and relentless. Below, Lucian stood with 3 of his men near the fountain, his coat unbuttoned, shirt sleeves rolled up despite the chill. One of the men was trembling. I could see it even from up here. Lucian wasn't shouting. His voice was too controlled for that. But the tension in the air was palpable, an invisible current that made even the rain hesitate. And then I saw him lift his hand, slow and almost graceful, before striking the man across the face. The crack of it echoed up through the courtyard. "You don't lie to me," Lucian said, his tone quiet enough that I almost missed it. "Not about money, not about loyalty, not about her." Her. The word froze me. The man dropped to his knees, muttering something that sounded like a plea. Lucian watched him for a moment, then turned to walk away, his coat catching the wind, his men following. The one left behind stayed on his knees for a long time before collapsing forward, shoulders shaking. I backed away from the railing, my pulse pounding so hard it made the world tilt. Back in my room, I locked the door and sat in the dark, trying to steady my breathing. I had wanted to know who he really was. Now I did. He wasn't just powerful. He was the kind of man whose name carried weight even when whispered. The kind who ruled through fear, not affection. And yet somewhere between the fear and fascination, a more dangerous truth was forming. I didn't hate him. I should have. But every time I remembered the way he had looked at me that morning, steady and unflinching, something inside me stirred that I didn't want to name. The next morning, he came to see me. He didn't knock. He never did. "You were out last night," he said simply, standing in the doorway. I froze, my cup halfway to my lips. "How do you—" His gaze flicked to the camera above the corner of the room, a small black eye I hadn't noticed before. "You don't have to hide, but you should understand that curiosity here can be dangerous. Are you threatening me?" "No," he said, stepping closer. "I'm warning you." He was close enough now that I could see the faint scar at the base of his throat, pale against his tan skin. His cologne was subtle, warm and smoky, the kind of scent that lingered after he left, making the air feel less empty. "I saw you," I whispered, "in the courtyard." He studied me for a long moment. "And what did you see?" "You hit that man. He betrayed me. You could have talked to him." "I did." The calmness in his tone made my stomach twist. "Is that what happens to everyone who crosses you?" Lucian's eyes darkened, but not with anger, with something deeper, older. "No," he said quietly. "Only the ones I give a chance to, and they waste it." I should have stepped back, but I didn't. "And what about me? Did I already waste mine?" He stared at me for so long that I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice that barely broke a whisper, he said, "Not yet." Something in the way he said it made my chest ache, like a warning, like a promise. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "You'll join me for dinner tonight," he said. "Downstairs, 8 o'clock." It wasn't a request. The dining room looked like it belonged in a palace, not a private home. Crystal chandeliers, white candles flickering in tall holders, silver cutlery that caught the light like blades. When Lucian entered, everyone else stood until he sat. Then, as if a silent signal passed through the air, the others began to move again, serving, clearing, existing quietly around him. He gestured for me to sit beside him, not across. The scent of wine and cedar lingered between us. "You haven't asked what you want to know," he said, cutting into his steak with precise movements. "What makes you think I want to know anything?" "Because you look at me like I'm both the reason you can breathe and the reason you're afraid to." His words hit too close to the truth. I set down my fork. "You're used to people fearing you. I'm used to people misunderstanding me. Is there a difference?" His smile was faint, sad, almost human. Only to me. We ate mostly in silence after that, but every time our eyes met, the air thickened. There was something in him that didn't fit. Brutality wrapped in restraint, danger softened by strange moments of gentleness. When dessert arrived, he leaned closer and murmured, "Tomorrow, you'll see my world. If you're going to survive in it, you need to understand what it takes to keep it." I looked up, heart pounding. "And if I don't want to see it?" "Then close your eyes," he said softly. "But I won't." That night, I lay awake listening to the sound of distant engines and the faint click of doors locking somewhere below. I should have been terrified, but instead I felt a slow, inexplicable pull toward the man whose world could crush me, and whose voice somehow made me feel alive again. And as sleep claimed me, one thought circled through my mind like a prayer and a curse all at once. I had escaped one monster only to fall into another. But this one didn't cage me with fists. He caged me with fascination. There are moments that divide your life into before and after. And for me, that night in Lucian Moretti's world was one of them. The night I saw what kind of man I had married. Not by choice, but by survival. And realized that every kindness he had ever shown me was built on a foundation of violence sharp enough to draw blood from the air itself. It began quietly. I was in the library, a cavernous room that smelled of old leather and dust, pretending to read but really listening to the low hum of voices outside the door. Lucian had told me he would be away for a few days, handling business. He had left without explanation, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but waited. A silence that warned, "Don't ask." But the thing about silence is that it doesn't last long around powerful men. I heard the rumble of engines long before I saw the headlights through the rain-streaked window. Then came the footsteps. Hurried, sharp, the sound of authority colliding with fear. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Lucian. It was one of his men. Matteo, I'd learned his name by then. Tall, quiet, the kind of man who rarely made eye contact. His suit was soaked, his face tense. "Stay inside, Mrs. Moretti," he said. "Lock the door and don't come out until the boss says." My stomach twisted. "What's happening?" He hesitated, then said, "They found something. Someone." And before I could ask, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him like a warning disguised as politeness. Someone. The word crawled under my skin. I waited for 10 minutes. Maybe 15. The silence outside became unbearable, like the air itself was holding its breath. I tried to tell myself it was none of my business, that I didn't belong in this world, that whatever was happening beyond that door was the kind of thing I could never unsee once I looked. But fear and curiosity are cousins, and they both live in the same restless heart. I opened the door. The hallway was dim, the sound of voices echoing faintly from downstairs. I followed them, barefoot, the marble cool beneath my feet. When I reached the balcony overlooking the main hall, I froze. Lucian stood below, his coat still wet from rain, dark hair slicked back, his expression carved from ice. 2 men held someone between them, a man struggling, blood on his lip, eyes wild with desperation. It took me a moment to recognize him. Julian. My ex. My nightmare. My ghost. The sight of him sent a shock through me so sharp I had to grip the railing to steady myself. His once perfect suit was torn, his face bruised, but his voice, that same voice that used to whisper apologies before turning cruel, cut through the room with venom. "You think you can keep her from me, you bastard?" He spat, blood splattering the floor. "She's mine. You can hide her behind your guards and your guns, but she'll come back. They always do." Lucian didn't flinch. He moved closer, his steps unhurried, his hands clasped behind his back, as if he were listening to a sermon. "She's not yours," Lucian said, his tone calm but deadly quiet. "And you shouldn't have come here." Julian laughed, a jagged sound. "What are you, her knight in shining armor? You think she'll love you? You're worse than me. At least I didn't pretend to be good. Lucian's smile was slow and terrifying. You're right, he said softly. I've never pretended to be good. And then he hit him. It wasn't rage. It was precision. A single blow that sent Julian to his knees, the sound of it echoing through the hall like thunder. I gasped, covering my mouth, but couldn't look away. Lucian's men stepped back, their faces unreadable, accustomed to violence the way priests are accustomed to prayer. Lucian crouched down beside him, his voice low enough that I had to lean forward to catch it. You hurt her, he said. You made her bleed. You made her run barefoot through a city full of men who would have used her up and thrown her away. And now you stand here in my house and speak her name like you have the right. Julian spat blood. She was mine before she was yours. Lucian's hand tightened around his jaw, forcing him to look up. She was never anyone's, he said. And there was something in his voice. Not fury, not cruelty, but conviction, dark and absolute. And that's what kills men like you. You don't understand that power doesn't come from ownership. It comes from what you protect. He let go, and Julian crumpled, gasping. Take him to the car, Lucian said to his men. He's leaving in pieces. That broke me. I ran down the stairs before I could think, the echo of my steps drawing every eye. Lucian, stop! His head snapped toward me, surprise flickering briefly before it vanished beneath steel. You shouldn't be here. You can't kill him, I said, breathless. You can't. He would have killed you. That doesn't make you better. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching near his temple. You think this is about being better? This is about ending what hunts you. I shook my head. You said you protect, not own. But this is control. This is you showing me your power. Something in his eyes changed then, a flicker of pain buried beneath the fury. For a moment he looked almost human. Maybe, he said quietly. Or maybe I just don't want to see you bleed again. Julian laughed weakly from the floor. You see, sweetheart? He said hoarsely. He's no savior, just another monster who wears nicer suits. Lucian's expression went cold. He turned to his men. Take him away. Lucian, I started, but he cut me off. Go upstairs, Amara. I'm not afraid of you. He stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper now, but it carried the weight of command. You should be. And then he walked away, leaving me standing there, trembling, surrounded by the ghosts of my past and the monster who had become my present. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my room, my mind replaying every second of what I'd seen. The precision of Lucian's movements, the quiet violence in his voice, the moment when rage and mercy had looked like two sides of the same coin. When the door opened, I thought it was a dream. He stood there in the dark, no suit jacket now, just a black shirt, sleeves rolled, collar undone. His eyes were unreadable. He's gone, he said simply. Gone where? Does it matter? I swallowed hard. Did you kill him? He didn't answer right away. You want the truth? Yes. He stepped closer, his voice low, roughened by exhaustion. No. But I wanted to. I still do. Something in my chest broke then. Not from fear, but from understanding. Because I saw it clearly for the first time. The man he showed the world and the one buried underneath were at war, and I was caught between them. Why me? I whispered. Why did you do this for me? His hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed a strand of hair from my face. Because you remind me of something I thought was dead. What's that? Hope, he said. And just like that, I stopped seeing him as a monster. I saw the mask and the man behind it, and I realized they were both real, inseparable, inevitable. He turned to leave, pausing in the doorway. Lock your door, he said softly. There are worse men than me out there. As the door closed, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was charged, like the stillness before a storm. And I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that whatever had begun between us was no longer about survival. It was about surrender. By the next morning, the villa no longer felt like a sanctuary. The air had changed. It hummed with unease, like the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. I could sense it in the men's hurried footsteps, the clipped way they spoke to one another, the faint smell of smoke that clung to the hallways as though violence left its scent behind even after it was gone. Lucian was gone when I woke. No note, no message. Just silence. The kind that filled every corner of the room like fog. I found myself staring at the empty space where he had stood the night before, the memory of his hand brushing mine replaying over and over like a heartbeat I couldn't quiet. I wanted to hate him. I tried. But hate requires distance, and he had already gotten too close. By midday, I found Matteo outside the kitchen, his expression carved from stone. "Where is he?" I asked. He hesitated, glancing around before answering. "Handling fallout." "Fallout?" He looked me over, assessing, cautious. Julian Moreau wasn't alone. He had friends in places we don't like our enemies to be. I felt my stomach drop. "You mean politicians, cops, men who sell protection with one hand and betrayal with the other?" Matteo's tone darkened. "He was leverage to them, and now he's gone." I swallowed hard. "Gone as in, dead?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The realization sank in slowly, heavy and suffocating. I turned away, gripping the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing. It wasn't that I mourned Julian. I had lost that capacity long ago. But his death, or disappearance, or whatever truth Lucian had carved out of him, wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. A spark. And I could already feel the fire spreading. That evening, I stood on the balcony overlooking the courtyard. The sky was bruised purple, the kind of twilight that makes everything look softer than it is. Below, the guards paced like restless shadows, their movements sharper, their voices lower. I could feel the storm coming, not from the sky, but from the world Lucian lived in, the one that operated beneath marble and silk, where loyalty was currency and betrayal bought you a bullet. When the door opened behind me, I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I could always tell when he was near. "You shouldn't be out here," Lucian said quietly. I wrapped my arms around myself. "Your men said there's trouble." He moved beside me, leaning on the railing. The fading light caught the side of his face, and for the first time I saw exhaustion there, a kind of bone-deep weariness that made him look more human than I'd ever seen him. "There's always trouble," he said, "but this is different." "Because of Julian?" He exhaled, slowly. "Because of what he left behind." I turned to him. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered on the horizon, as if he were searching for words that wouldn't make me break. "He was working with men who want what I have. Territory, power, access. When I took him off the board, they took it personally." My pulse quickened. "So they'll come for you." He looked at me then, eyes dark and steady. "No. They'll come for you." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Me? They'll want to finish what he started, use you as leverage, make me bend." "And you'll kill them," I said, my voice shaking. "If I can," he said simply, "before they touch you." Something in his tone, that mix of certainty and quiet menace, made my skin prickle. I should have been terrified, but instead I felt the strangest flicker of safety. Because if the world was coming for me, there was no one else I would rather have standing between me and it. "I never asked you to protect me," I whispered. I know. Then why do you? He looked at me for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low enough to feel rather than hear. Because I see what it did to you. What he did. And I can't undo it. But I can make sure no one ever does it again. The words sank into me like warmth and warning all at once. I'm not something to be saved, I said, my throat tight. His jaw flexed. Maybe not. But you are something I won't lose. I stepped back, my pulse racing. You can't keep saying things like that. Why not? Because they sound like promises. He smiled faintly, that same dangerous, devastating smile that never reached his eyes. That's exactly what they are. In that night, the house came alive with movement, cars pulling into the courtyard, men speaking in quick bursts of Italian, the sharp click of safeties being tested on guns. I stood at the top of the stairs, watching the chaos unfold below, feeling both invisible and exposed. Lucian barked orders from the center of the room, his voice steady but urgent. He moved like a man who'd been through this 100 times. Unshakable, methodical, lethal. Keep the perimeter tight, he said. No one comes in or out, not even the priests. The men laughed softly, that grim kind of humor people use when death is too close to ignore. Then, as if he felt my gaze, Lucian looked up. Amara, he called. The sound of my name in his mouth sent a shiver through me. Come here. I descended slowly, feeling the weight of a dozen eyes follow me. When I reached him, he took my hand without hesitation, leading me toward the hallway behind the staircase. What's happening? I asked. Nothing you need to see, he said. You'll stay in the panic room until I say otherwise. I'm not hiding while you... He stopped, turning so fast I nearly collided with him. This isn't a discussion. Anger flared in me, sharp and foolish. You think you can lock me away every time the world gets ugly? I know the world is ugly, he said, his voice rising slightly. And you're not ready to see how deep it goes. Then make me ready, I snapped. For a moment, silence stretched between us, crackling with everything we weren't saying. Then unexpectedly he laughed, low, dark, and tired. You don't even know what you're asking for, he murmured. But maybe one day you will. He brushed his fingers along my cheek, the touch gentle enough to undo me completely. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the hall as the noise of engines and shouting grew louder outside. I stayed by the door, watching him disappear into the chaos, and something in my chest twisted. I had run from one man's violence into another's, but this time, the fear was different. Because beneath it, tangled and impossible, was trust. The attack came just after midnight. I woke to the sound of gunfire, sharp, deafening, too close. The windows shook. Somewhere below, men were shouting. My heart slammed against my ribs as I stumbled out of bed, the world spinning. Then the door burst open, and Lucian's voice cut through the noise. Amara! He was there, a shadow of motion and breath, pulling me toward him. His shirt was torn, his face streaked with soot. But his eyes, those dark, relentless eyes, were still steady. Stay behind me, he ordered. What's happening? They found us. I didn't ask who they were. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the warmth of his hand gripping mine as we ran down the corridor, bullets shattering glass behind us, the world narrowing to light, noise, and breath. He stopped at the end of the hall, pushing me toward a steel door hidden behind a tapestry. Inside, he said. No, I said, shaking my head. I'm not leaving you. He looked at me then, really looked. And for the first time I saw something break in his expression. Don't make me lose you too. Before I could answer, he kissed me. Sudden, desperate, full of everything we hadn't said. Then he pushed me into the room, slammed the door, and the lock clicked shut. I pounded on it, shouting his name, but my voice was swallowed by gunfire and silence. Hours later, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell, the noise stopped. The door opened. Matteo stood there, covered in blood, his face pale. "It's over," he said. "But he's hurt." My heart stopped. "Lucian?" He nodded. "Come quickly." As I followed him through the wreckage, smoke, shattered glass, the metallic scent of gunpowder thick in the air, I saw Lucian lying on the floor near the stairs, half conscious, blood seeping through his shirt. "Amara," he rasped when he saw me, "told you to stay hidden." I fell to my knees beside him, tears stinging my eyes. "You can't die," I whispered. "Not now, not after everything." He managed a faint, crooked smile. "Wasn't planning to." But his hand was cold in mine, and as his eyes fluttered shut, I realized with terrifying clarity that the past hadn't just caught up with us. It had come to collect its debt. The night the gunfire stopped, silence became the loudest thing in the house. It didn't feel like safety. It felt like the pause between storms, a fragile moment of stillness that trembled under its own weight. The corridors were lined with smoke, the air heavy with the scent of burnt metal and fear. They carried Lucian to his bedroom, though it looked more like a battlefield now. Shattered glass, blood trailing across marble, the echoes of chaos still whispering in the corners. I followed in a daze, my hands trembling, my dress torn, bare feet blackened with soot. Every time his head fell back, every time his breath caught, I felt something inside me splinter a little more. When they laid him on the bed, Matteo turned to me. "He needs rest," he said, his voice low but firm. "Rest?" I laughed, a small broken sound. "He's bleeding." "He's alive," Matteo said. "That's more than most tonight." And then he left, closing the door behind him, leaving me alone with the man who had turned my life inside out. Lucian looked different in unconsciousness. The sharp edges were gone, no command in his jawline, no weight of authority in his posture. Just a man, pale and still, with blood drying along his collarbone and dark circles under his eyes. The bullet had grazed his side. It wasn't fatal, they'd said. But seeing the crimson stains seeping through the bandages made my stomach twist with dread. I sat beside him, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead, whispering things I hadn't meant to say out loud. "You can't leave me," I murmured. "You don't get to tear my world apart and then disappear." His hand twitched, just slightly, as if answering. For hours I stayed there, wiping his brow, changing the bandages, listening to the faint rise and fall of his breathing. Outside, the night stretched on endlessly, the kind of darkness that eats the world whole. I found myself talking to him even when I knew he couldn't hear. "I used to think love was supposed to make you feel safe," I said quietly. "But maybe it's supposed to make you feel seen, even if that means being seen by someone who could destroy you." At some point, I must have fallen asleep with my head resting on the edge of the bed. When I woke, sunlight was seeping through the curtains, pale and uncertain. I blinked, my neck stiff, and then froze. Lucian's eyes were open. He was watching me. Not with the cold detachment I'd grown used to, but with something softer, something almost disbelieving. "How long have you been sitting there?" he asked, his voice rough and low, the kind of voice that sounded like it carried every scar he'd ever earned. "Long enough," I said, relief flooding through me. "You were out all night." He tried to sit up, wincing when the movement pulled at his side. "I've had worse." I reached out instinctively, pressing my hand against his chest. "Don't. You'll reopen it." He looked down at my hand, then up at me, his eyes locking onto mine. "You shouldn't be here." "You say that every time," I said. "And yet I'm still here." He exhaled a faint laugh, shaking his head. "You're impossible." I've been called worse. For a moment, the air between us felt suspended. No threats, no blood, no ghosts of what had just happened. Just quiet. Just us. Then he reached for my hand, his fingers brushing mine, warm despite everything. You could have run, he said softly. When it started, when they came, you could have escaped. I thought about it. Why didn't you? I hesitated, because I was afraid. Of them? I shook my head. Of losing you. He went still, the faintest muscle jumping in his jaw. Don't say things you don't mean, Amara. I mean everything I say, I whispered. That's the problem. He leaned back, eyes closing briefly as if trying to compose himself. You don't know what you're getting into. I'm already in it. The words hung there, heavier than any confession. Later that day, I forced him to rest while I went searching for water and clean sheets. The servants avoided my gaze, some out of respect, others out of fear. They all knew what had happened, what it meant for anyone close to him. The attack had been a message, one written in gunfire and smoke. In the study, I found Matteo speaking in low tones to another man I didn't recognize. When they saw me, they stopped. How bad is it? I asked. Matteo's expression didn't change. Bad enough. They hit one of our warehouses in Palermo this morning, and they'll hit more. We've started moving assets. It's going to be a long war. A long war. The words sent a chill through me. I had thought this was about revenge, about Julian, about one man's cruelty answered by another's justice. But it wasn't. It was about empires and bloodlines, about debts paid in lives. Does he know? I asked. Matteo nodded. He always knows. I hesitated. And me? He gave me a look that was almost pity. He'll never tell you everything. He can't. When I returned to the bedroom, Lucian was sitting up, reading through a stack of papers on the bedside table. The sight made me laugh bitterly. You're bleeding and you're working? Business doesn't stop, he said without looking up. You were almost killed. He glanced at me then, that faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Almost isn't enough to stop me. Is anything? He didn't answer. I crossed the room, snatching the papers from his hand. You need to rest. His gaze snapped to mine. Sharp. Dangerous. Don't. For a heartbeat, we stared at each other. The air charged and heavy. Then slowly, his expression softened. I'm not used to anyone telling me what to do. Maybe that's why you need someone too. He studied me for a long moment. You really think you can save me, don't you? I don't want to save you, I said, my voice trembling despite me. I just want you to stop acting like you're already dead. He looked away, his jaw tightening. People like me don't get to live normal lives, Amara. We survive. That's the best we can hope for. Then maybe surviving with me is enough, I whispered. He said nothing, but when I turned to leave, he caught my wrist, his fingers circling it gently. Don't give me something I can't keep. What if I already have? He didn't let go. His thumb brushed over my pulse, feeling the tremor there. And for a moment it felt like the world had narrowed to that single touch. Fragile, dangerous, alive. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the shadows too deep. I wandered into the hall, drawn by the faint flicker of light beneath the study door. Lucian was there, standing by the window, shirt half unbuttoned, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His reflection in the glass looked older, haunted, like the ghosts outside were whispering to him. You should be in bed, I said softly. He didn't turn. Sleep doesn't come easily. I moved closer. Because of the pain? He took a slow sip, eyes still fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. Because of the memories, I hesitated, then asked, "What did they take from you?" For a long time, he said nothing. Then in a voice that barely carried, he said, "Everything. My brother. My mother. The only people who made me believe I wasn't born for blood." I froze. I didn't know. "You weren't supposed to." He finally looked at me then, and in that moment he looked nothing like the man who had ordered men to their deaths. He looked broken. And I realized that this quiet grief, was the part of him he hid most carefully. I stepped closer, reaching for the glass, setting it aside. "You don't have to be alone in it." He laughed softly. "I've been alone longer than you've been alive. Then it's time that changed." For a long time, he just looked at me, as if weighing whether to believe me or not. Then he said, almost to himself, "If you stay, they'll come for you too." "Let them," I whispered. "I'm done running." He reached out then, cupping my face in his hand, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "You don't know what you're promising." "I do." And when his forehead touched mine, I realized that in this house of shadows and secrets, promises were the most dangerous things of all, because in the end, they were the only things worth breaking for. There are moments when the world doesn't end with a scream, but with a whisper. A door closing quietly. A familiar voice speaking words that no longer sound the same. That was how I first felt it. The fracture beneath the surface. The faint tremor of something breaking long before I could name it. The days after the attack blurred together. Long hours of quiet recovery, of tension wrapped in stillness. Lucian had returned to his office, his wounds healing, but his temper sharper, his gaze turning colder. I could feel it even when he didn't speak. The shift in him, the way the air itself seemed to bend around his anger. Something was wrong. He spent his days surrounded by papers, maps, ledgers full of names and debts. Matteo was always near, silent, efficient, the shadow that followed him everywhere. They spoke in half-sentences, their conversations clipped, like every word carried a weight that might collapse if handled too roughly. But one night, as I passed the study door, I heard something that made my skin crawl. "She's become a weakness," Matteo said. His voice was low but sharp, the kind of tone men use when they think they're being practical. "They'll exploit it." Lucian's answer came slowly, deliberate. "I know what they'll try. And if they do, then they'll learn what happens when you touch what's mine." There was a pause, one that felt like a blade being drawn quietly from its sheath. "Don't make this personal, Lucian," Matteo said. "You can't protect her and run this war at the same time." Lucian's reply was colder. "Watch me." I stepped back before they could see me, my heart pounding so hard I could taste it. The words echoed in my head, tangled and contradictory. Weakness, mine, protect, war. It all sounded like a promise wrapped around a threat. That night, when I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. The house felt alive, creaking, sighing, whispering in the dark. I kept thinking of Matteo, his calm eyes, the loyalty that had always seemed unshakable. There had been something in his tone tonight that I hadn't heard before. Resentment, calculation. By dawn, the unease had solidified into certainty. Something was coming. Then 2 days later, it arrived. Lucian had gone to meet a contact in the city, someone who could offer information about the men behind the attack. He had taken Matteo and 2 guards. Before he left, he'd touched my cheek briefly. A silent reassurance I hadn't realized I needed until it was gone. "I'll be back before nightfall," he said. "Keep the doors locked." But as dusk fell, the first call came. It was one of the guards. His voice strained, panicked. "We've been hit." And then the line went dead. The room tilted. I stood frozen, phone clutched in my hand, until the second call came, from Mateo's number this time. I answered it on instinct. Mateo? Silence. Then a voice I didn't recognize said, "He won't be coming back." And then the world exploded. I heard shouting outside, the sound of engines, the dull thunder of gunfire echoing from the gates. The villa trembled, and I ran to the window just in time to see headlights flaring in the courtyard. Black cars, men pouring out, their silhouettes slicing through the mist. My first thought wasn't of myself. It was of Lucian. I didn't know if he was alive. I didn't know if he'd ever made it out. All I knew was that Mateo, the man who had sworn loyalty, who had guarded Lucian's secrets like they were sacred, had sold him out. The guards pulled me back from the window. "Upstairs, Signora," one shouted, but I wrenched free. "No, I have to find him." "Boss's orders. He's not here." The man hesitated, caught between duty and instinct, and that was all the time I needed. I bolted through the hall, barefoot, my heartbeat a roar in my ears. The gunfire grew louder, closer. The main door burst open. One of Lucian's men stumbled in, bleeding, gasping for breath. "They ambushed us," he rasped. "Mateo, he shot the boss." The words hit me like a blow. "No," I whispered. "No, he wouldn't." But the look on his face told me everything. "He's alive," the man added quickly, "but hurt. He told me to get you out." "I'm not leaving him." "You don't understand. I said I'm not leaving." And before he could argue, I grabbed a gun from his holster. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "Tell me where." "Warehouse near the docks," he said, "but it's crawling with them. Then we'd better hurry." The drive was a blur of darkness and fear, the city lights streaking past like ghosts. Every turn of the road felt like the edge of something I couldn't come back from. When we reached the docks, the night was split open by fire. The warehouse half in ruins, flames licking up into the sky. The smell of smoke and blood was everywhere. I slipped through the side door, the gun heavy in my hand. My body moved before my mind could catch up. The kind of movement born of desperation, of love sharpened into survival. Inside, I saw them. Mateo standing over Lucian, who was on his knees, blood streaking down his face. "You were my brother," Lucian said, his voice low, cracked with disbelief. "After everything—" Mateo's face was calm, eerily calm. "You forgot what this was about, Lucian. You started thinking with your heart instead of your head. You think she made you strong. She made you weak." Lucian's laugh was quiet, bitter. "Then why are your hands shaking?" Mateo hesitated, and that was the only opening I needed. I raised the gun. "Step away from him." Both men turned. The shock on Lucian's face broke me. "Amara," he said, his voice rough, "you shouldn't be here." Mateo's smile was faint. "Ah, the reason for all this." He turned his gun toward me. Lucian moved instantly. Despite his wound, he lunged forward, grabbing Mateo's arm. The two of them collided, a blur of violence and betrayal. The sound of the gunshot cracked the air, echoing through the burning walls. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Then Mateo stumbled backward, blood blooming across his chest. He looked at Lucian, eyes wide, almost childlike. "It was supposed to be me," he whispered. "It was always supposed to be me." And then he fell. Lucian swayed, catching himself on the table, breathing hard. I ran to him, dropping the gun, catching his face in my hands. "You're bleeding again," I said, the words trembling out of me. He smiled faintly, eyes closing. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to." "Why?" "Because if you died, I'd never forgive you." His laughter broke into a wince of pain. "You're insane." "So are you." The fire crackled around us, the light painting everything in gold and red. For a moment it felt like the world had narrowed to just this. Blood, smoke, and two people too broken to let go. Sirens wailed in the distance. Lucian leaned his forehead against mine, his breath uneven. "It's over," he murmured. "It's finally over." But I wasn't so sure, because somewhere beneath the relief I could still feel it. The shifting of something larger, something unseen. The betrayal had ended, yes, but its echoes were still coming. And as we staggered out into the night, his arm around me, I knew that this wasn't the end of our war. It was only the beginning of another. There are moments when silence feels like a living thing, when it presses against your ribs, fills your lungs, makes it impossible to breathe. That's how the days after Matteo's death felt. The world had gone quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was aftermath. Lucian and I had escaped the fire, but not the consequences. The news spread through the city like smoke. Whispers of betrayal. Blood spilled within the Moretti ranks, the empire cracking beneath the weight of what had been lost. We took refuge in one of his safe houses outside Palermo, a place with no guards, no marble, no gilded cages. Just a small villa by the sea, where the sound of waves filled the spaces that words couldn't reach. He was still healing, his movements slower, his eyes darker. I helped him change the bandages each night, my hands trembling less with each passing day. There was something sacred about those moments. The closeness, the quiet, the way his breathing steadied when I was near. But the silence between us was heavy with things unsaid. One night, as the sky deepened into violet and the sea turned to glass, he sat by the window, staring out at the horizon. I watched him from the bed, the flicker of candlelight tracing the lines of his face, sharp, beautiful, and burdened. "You're thinking too much," I said softly. He didn't turn. "That's all I ever do." "Then stop." He gave a humorless laugh. "If I stop, everything I've done will catch up to me." I rose and walked to him, the cool tile beneath my bare feet grounding me. "It already has." He looked up then, slowly, like it hurt, and for a moment I saw something raw in his eyes. Not power, not control, just a man lost inside his own choices. "You don't understand, Amara," he said quietly. "Matteo wasn't just a soldier. He was my brother in every way that mattered. I trusted him with everything. My family, my life, my soul. And I killed him." "He would have killed you," I said. He shook his head. "It doesn't matter. Betrayal doesn't justify betrayal. It only multiplies it. Lucian, I built an empire on blood," he continued, voice tightening. "And somewhere along the way I forgot why I started. Matteo's death wasn't just his fault. It was mine, because I made loyalty a weapon. I wanted to reach for him, but he was too far gone into himself, trapped in the labyrinth of guilt he had spent years building. "You can't keep carrying all of it," I whispered. "You'll drown." He looked at me, and for a long moment he didn't speak. Then he said, "Maybe that's what I deserve." Something inside me broke then, not out of pity but recognition, because I knew that kind of self-destruction. I had lived it, just in a different shape. So I told him the truth I had never planned to tell. "When I ran from Julian," I began, my voice trembling, "I didn't just run because of what he did to me. I ran because of what I did." Lucian turned fully now, his attention sharp, quiet. "I'd started to hate him long before that night," I said. "Not just for the bruises or the lies, but for what he turned me into. Someone small. Someone who begged. One night I wanted him to stop. I wanted it so badly that I thought if he died, it would end. And I meant it." Tears burned at the back of my eyes. I used to dream about it. About his hands going still, his voice silenced. When I saw him in your house, I thought maybe that wish had finally come true. And then I hated myself for feeling relieved. Lucian said nothing. He just sat there, eyes fixed on me, unreadable but not unfeeling. I think, I whispered, that's why I stayed. Not because you saved me, but because you didn't lie to me about what you are. You didn't pretend to be gentle when you weren't. And for the first time, I didn't have to pretend either. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, as if the truth had shifted something inside him. You think I'm not lying to you? You haven't yet. He gave a faint, bitter smile. Then it's time I start. My heart skipped. What do you mean? He stood, wincing slightly, his shadow stretching across the floor. The night we met, when you stumbled into the street, when I brought you to my car, that wasn't an accident. I stared at him. What are you saying? I'd been watching Julian for months, he said, his tone low, even. He was involved with people who owed me more than money. He was reckless, arrogant, a liability to everyone around him. I wanted information about a deal he was running through your father's firm. You were supposed to be leverage. My breath caught. Leverage? He nodded, his jaw tightening. When you ran, I sent my men to follow you. I didn't expect you to end up half-conscious in front of my car, but once you did, I took you. I told myself it was protection, that I was saving you from him. But the truth is, it was convenient. You were a way to keep him under control. The words struck like a slap, each one cutting deeper than the last. So when you married me, I started, my voice breaking. He looked away. It was supposed to be a cover, a legal shield to keep you from being traced back to him. I didn't mean for it to become anything else. My knees felt weak. I sank back onto the edge of the bed. And now? He hesitated. Now it's the only thing that feels real. Tears blurred my vision. You used me. Yes, he said, the word sharp and bare. And I've regretted it every day since. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to tell him that love built on manipulation wasn't love at all. But the anger tangled with something else, something messier, more dangerous, because beneath the betrayal was understanding. He hadn't lied to hurt me. He had lied because he didn't know any other way to keep what he was afraid to lose. And in some terrible, twisted way, I understood that. You could have told me, I said quietly. He shook his head. You would have run. I might have stayed anyway. He stared at me, as if trying to decide whether to believe that. Then finally he said, I don't deserve that kind of mercy. I rose and crossed the space between us, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. It's not mercy, I said. It's choice. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The candle burned low, the sea murmured outside, and the air between us vibrated with everything we couldn't take back. Then slowly he reached for me. His hand trembled as it brushed against my cheek. If you stay, he whispered, I can't promise peace. I can't promise safety. I can't even promise honesty. But I can promise you this. If the world comes for you again, it'll have to go through me first. I looked up at him through tears, my voice breaking. And if it comes for you? Then I'll finally have something worth dying for. He kissed me then. Not gentle, not perfect, but real. Every breath carrying the weight of truth and guilt, and something that almost felt like forgiveness. When it broke, I rested my forehead against his, whispering, Then let's live before we lose the chance. And as the candle guttered out, plunging the room into darkness, I understood the cruel, beautiful truth of what we had become. Two broken things holding each other together. Not because it was right, but because it was the only thing that still made sense. There's a certain kind of stillness that only comes before something terrible. You can feel it, like the way the air thickens before a storm, the way the earth seems to brace itself for impact. That was how the world felt when Lucian decided to return. 3 weeks had passed since the fire. 3 weeks of silence and recovery, of whispered names and unspoken fears. The men who had turned on him were scattered, some dead, some hiding, some waiting to see if the ghost of their old boss would rise again or fade quietly into legend. But Lucian Moretti had never been the kind of man who stayed buried. He began to move like a shadow reclaiming its shape. One message at a time, one order whispered into the dark. I watched it unfold from the edge of his world, the same world that had once terrified me and now somehow defined me. He was still hurt, his side bandaged, his movements slower, but the weakness had shifted into something sharper. There was a cold fire in his eyes now, the kind that doesn't burn out, only inward. "We strike back," he said one morning, standing by the window as dawn split the sky into shards of pale gold. "They think I'm finished. They need to remember who I am." I stood behind him, arms crossed, the memory of our confession still raw between us. "And what am I supposed to do while you start another war?" He turned, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth. "You stay alive." I hated that answer. "You promised I wasn't a weakness. You're not." He walked toward me, stopping just close enough that I could feel his breath against my skin. "But you're still the only thing that could break me." I should have argued. Instead, I reached up and touched the scar along his jaw, tracing it with a fingertip. "Then don't give them the chance." The plan began that night. Lucian's men, the ones who'd stayed loyal, returned like ghosts called home by gravity. There weren't many left, but the ones who came carried eyes that had seen too much, and hearts that had already decided they'd rather die than betray him again. The house by the sea became a war room. Maps, photographs, red strings connecting faces to names. Men who'd once been allies, now enemies. Every name written on the table was a heartbeat he meant to stop. And through it all, he let me stay. I learned more about him in those nights than I ever had before. The way he thought 3 steps ahead of everyone. The way his calm could fill a room and make other men shake. The way he spoke, low, deliberate, dangerous, like he was building an empire from the ashes of his own damnation. But I also saw the cracks, the pain in his shoulders when he thought no one was watching, the sleepless eyes that stared too long into the dark, the way his hand lingered over the gun longer than it used to, as if even power had started to feel heavy. Once I asked him if he was afraid. "Every day," he said, "but fear's what keeps me from losing control." "And if you lose it?" He looked at me for a long time. "Then you run." I didn't tell him I wouldn't. And the first hit came 2 nights later. One of the enemy's safe houses burned to the ground. 3 men found bound and silent in a warehouse outside Palermo. It was brutal, surgical, the kind of message that didn't need words. But messages invite replies. By the 5th night, they came for us. The villa was quiet. Too quiet. When I woke to the sound of distant engines. The kind of hum that doesn't belong on a coastal road at midnight. I slipped from the bed and looked out the window, my heart freezing. Headlights, 5 cars. "Lucian?" I whispered, shaking him awake. He was up in an instant, all instinct, grabbing the gun from the nightstand. "Stay here." "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not this time." He looked at me, the kind of look that could cut glass. "Amara, I'm not leaving you again." Something flickered in his eyes then. Pride, frustration, love, all tangled into one impossible thing. But he didn't argue. Instead, he handed me a smaller gun. "Safety's here," he said. "You point it only if you're ready to kill." I nodded, gripping the metal like it was a heartbeat. Then the glass shattered. The first bullet hit the wall behind us, splintering wood, echoing through the hall. Lucian moved like lightning, pulling me behind the dresser, returning fire through the window. The sound was deafening, the air thick with smoke and dust. He shouted something to the men downstairs, and I could hear them responding. A symphony of chaos. For a few endless minutes, it was just noise and light and terror. Then suddenly, silence. Lucian pressed a hand to my shoulder. "Stay here." But I followed him anyway, down the stairs, through the haze. Bodies lay sprawled across the floor. Some his, some theirs. Blood pooling in quiet rivers that glinted in the flickering light. At the center of the chaos stood a man I didn't recognize. Tall, young, dressed too cleanly for the dirt he was standing in. He held a gun, and it was pointed straight at Lucian. "You've lost, Moretti," the man said. "Your empire's dead. Matteo made sure of it." Lucian's voice was calm. "You don't even know what you're standing in." "I know enough." "No," Lucian said, stepping closer. "You know names. I built the world those names belong to." The man hesitated, just long enough. Lucian moved first. 2 shots, precise, final. The man collapsed, and then it was over. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the sound of my breathing and the ocean crashing somewhere beyond the smoke. I walked toward him slowly, my hands shaking. "How many times can you survive this?" I whispered. He looked at me, blood on his hands, pain in his eyes, and said, "As many as it takes." By dawn, the house was half gone, windows blown out, walls cracked, the sea wind carrying the smell of fire. Lucian sat on the steps outside, staring at the horizon, the light washing him in gold and ruin. I knelt beside him. "What now?" He turned to me, his voice quiet. "Now we rebuild." "And us?" He didn't answer at first. Then softly, "You shouldn't love me." "I know. But you do." "Yes." He smiled faintly, but there was sadness in it. "Then I suppose that's one more thing they can never take from me." He reached for my hand, his grip unsteady, the first rays of sunlight catching on the scars across his knuckles. For a moment, we just sat there. Survivors in a world made of ashes. 2 people who had become each other's ruin and salvation. Then the phone rang. Lucian's hand tightened around mine before he answered. A voice on the other end said only one thing. "They found her." Lucian froze. "Who?" There was a pause. Then softly, "His wife." The color drained from his face. He met my eyes, something unreadable flickering in them. Fear, guilt, revelation. "My wife's been dead for years," he said slowly. The voice crackled. "Not anymore." And just like that, the fragile peace shattered. Because some ghosts don't stay buried. Some come back to finish the story. They say ghosts can't touch you, that they're only echoes, memories trapped between breaths. But whoever said that never met a ghost with unfinished business. The morning after the call, Lucian didn't speak. He sat by the shattered window of the villa, the sea wind dragging at the tattered curtains, the light catching on the faint scars along his jaw. The air between us was heavy, thick with the weight of a truth neither of us could run from anymore. "She's alive," he said finally. His voice was calm, but it was the kind of calm that only exists after something inside you has died. I stood across from him, the cold seeping into my bare feet, the silence between us stretching too far. "How?" "She faked it," he said. "The car crash, the fire, everything." "Why would she?" He looked up then, eyes hollow, old in a way I hadn't seen before. "Because she knew I'd never stop looking for her otherwise. Her name was Alessia. I had seen it. Before, on old photographs he thought I didn't notice. On a necklace he sometimes kept in his desk drawer. He never spoke of her. Not out of hatred, but reverence. The way one speaks of something holy that burned too brightly and left nothing but ashes. "What does she want?" I asked softly, though I already knew. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because in our world, people didn't come back for forgiveness. They came back for blood. We left the villa that night. Palermo was colder than I remembered, the streets slick with rain, the city alive with whispers. Lucian's men had found her, waiting in one of his old penthouses, dressed in black, her beauty untouched by time, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. I stayed in the car when he went in, but the door didn't close all the way, and I heard her voice, soft, elegant, the kind of voice that used to get what it wanted without ever raising itself. "You made quite the mess without me," Alessia said. "I buried you," Lucian replied. She laughed, low and musical. "You tried." There was a long pause, and then her tone turned colder. "You killed Matteo." Lucian's voice stayed level. "He betrayed me. He loved me. And he used that love to destroy everything I built. And yet here you are," she said, the sound of her heels clicking faintly across the floor. "Rebuilding with someone else's daughter? Tell me, Lucian, do you love her like you loved me?" His silence was the answer. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Every word between them was a blade, each sentence peeling back another layer of him I hadn't known existed. "You think she's different," Alessia said, "but she's the same kind of woman I was. Soft enough to love you, foolish enough to think she can survive it." Lucian's tone changed then. Quieter, darker. "You don't get to speak about her." "Oh, Lucian," she murmured. "You're still protecting broken things. You forget. I was one once, too." The sound of a gun being cocked cut through the room like lightning. My body moved before my mind did. I pushed the door open, heart pounding, shouting his name. Lucian turned sharply, his gun raised, but it was her who fired first. The shot rang out, deafening, the air filling with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Lucian stumbled, blood blooming across his shoulder, his hand tightening on the gun as he fired back. Alessia fell, her body crumpling against the marble, her eyes wide with something that looked almost like relief. I was at his side before the echo faded, pressing my hands against the wound, my voice shaking. "Stay with me, damn it, stay with me." He looked at me, that same impossible look, half pain, half peace. "It's over," he whispered. "She was the last ghost." "She was your past," I said, "not your ending." He smiled faintly, breath shallow. "Maybe you're both." He survived. Barely. The bullet missed his heart by an inch. But it left him changed. Slower. Quieter. As if every breath reminded him of how close he'd come to never taking another. We didn't return to Palermo. The city was too full of memories, too full of enemies pretending to be allies. Instead, we disappeared to the countryside, a small house surrounded by olive trees, and silence. He called it exile. I called it peace. The days grew softer, slower. The violence faded from his hands, replaced by something gentler, almost uncertain. Sometimes I'd wake to find him outside before dawn, standing barefoot in the field, the light catching the scar across his chest like a promise written in red. "What are you thinking?" I'd ask. "That I should be dead," he'd say, "and that I'm not. Regret it? Only the part where I didn't find you sooner." One evening, months later, I found him sitting by the fireplace, a letter in his hand. He didn't look up when I entered. "It's from her family," he said quietly. "They want to bury her next to Matteo." I knelt beside him. "And?" He tore the letter in half. "The dead have had enough of me." Then he looked at me, and in his eyes I saw everything. The man he'd been, the monster he'd become, and the fragile, flawed human he was still trying to be. "I don't know how to live without the fight," he said. "Without the fear. Without the blood." I took his hand, threading my fingers through his. "Then live with me anyway. Learn." He laughed softly, that rare, almost disbelieving sound. You think I can? I think you already are. He leaned forward then, resting his forehead against mine, his breath trembling. You should have run the first night you saw me. I did, I said. But somehow you were always where I ran to. He kissed me, slow, reverent, almost hesitant, as if afraid the moment itself might shatter. And maybe it did. Because when he pulled away, there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not darkness, not violence, just peace. Years later, when people spoke his name, they still did it in whispers. The legend of Lucian Moretti, the man who burned his world to save a woman who never asked him to. Sometimes I wonder if that's how I'll always remember him too. Not as the boss, not as the sinner, not even as the man who almost broke me, but as the one who taught me that love, real love, isn't something that saves you. It's something that finds you in the wreckage and decides to stay anyway. And on nights when the wind carries the scent of rain and salt, I still hear his voice. Low, rough, unyielding, reminding me of the vow we made in that burning house, the promise forged in pain and survival. If the world ever came for us again, it would have to go through us both, because in the end, love didn't rescue us. We rescued each other.